All right, I will say good morning. Let us begin. We have an incredible daf, really an incredible daf ahead of us today. Begin by thanking our sponsors, our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Nissan, Jerry and Abby Applebaum, in memory of David ben Avraham and Basya Bas Chaim, Doctors Paul and Linda Weinberg, in memory of Mordechai Yehoshua ben Peretz Moshe Miriam, Paul and Kathy Pollack in the zchus of refuah sheileimah for Donna Baker-Matson, Teri Czinn in honor of the birth of their grandson Bunim Tzvi Hersch, Naftali Tilson with Akaras Hatov to his chaver, Benjamin Wohl to the entire shir, Avraham Shaindy Kelman in memory of Sara Braina Bas Yehoshua. We also thank, those are all of our Talmud Torah sponsors, we thank them for their incredible generosity. We also thank our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, to thank Alan and Sue Meirowitz for dedicating the shir in memory of Pearl Meirowitz, Perel Bas Ben Sion Zichron Livracha, and Gregg Rachel Levitan in commemoration of the yahrzeit of their cousin Debra Bas Shmuel Zichrona Livracha. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the neshamas will have an aliyah and the families a nechama. Rabbi, with that, let us begin. So we really have an exceptionally beautiful daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is Memtes 49. We are picking up on Mem Chesed base 48b, and we left off 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, about 17 lines up from the bottom. Yosef Rav Chanina Bar Papi, Rabbi Ami, Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, Akilod Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha. So a very beautiful Gemara. Rav Chanina Bar Papi, Rabbi Abi, and Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha were all sitting on the porch of Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha. Such a beautiful image, right? They're all sitting together on the porch. Yosef Ka'amri, and they were talking, and they were sitting, and they were talking about the following. There was a particular city in Eretz Yisrael. And again, in this particular city, ultimately, again, the Avadim did not want to circumcise themselves. That was the Metzias. They didn't want to circumcise themselves. We remember again in yesterday's sugya, we were speaking about the fact, what did we say? What's the halacha? So halacha l'maisa, you could hold on to an evet for how long? 12 months, right? That's the halacha. You hold on to an evet for 12 months. You can go ahead and discuss with the evet, go back and forth with the evet about whether or not there should be a milah, right? And halacha l'maisa, if he's willing to go ahead and convert, good. If not, afterwards, what do you have to do? You have to sell him. Sell him to an akum. Okay, so what happened? They went ahead and they tried to negotiate with this evet up to 12 months. And then ultimately, again, they went ahead and sold them to an Ovid Kochavim. So, Kiman, whose opinion does this reflect? Ki haitana, disanya, halokeach eved mina Ovid Kochavim, velo ratza lamo. So listen to this, because we learned before that halacha l'maisa, if a person wants to go ahead, if a person purchases an eved from an Ovid Kochavim, and the eved doesn't want to go ahead and do bris milah, megalgel imo ad 12 chodesh. You can negotiate with him up until 12 months. So the Gemara says, lo mal, if after 12 months he still does not go ahead and want to do it, thank you, official, thank you so much. He does not want to go ahead and do a milah. Chozer umochro lo oved kochavim. Ultimately, you go ahead and you sell him to an oved kochavim. Rabbi Shimon Elazar says that halacha l'maisa imashin os. So okay, bro, I said that's the halacha. The truth is a little anticlimactic, because you already said this yesterday. Right? You already spoke about this yesod in yesterday's daf. So Rabbi Shimon Elazar comes along and says, in Mashin also Eretz Yisrael, mipnei hefsid taras. So the truth is, Rabbi Shimon Elazar comes along and he says that the truth is there's another issue. What's the additional issue? Of maintaining an uncircumcised evet in Eretz Yisrael because of hefsid taras. Now what does hefsid taras mean? Take a look at Rashi. Hefsid taras, shemetame es hatrumos do ovid kochav. I'm sorry, shemitami es hatrumos. Do ovid kochavim gozra alav sheitame kizav l'chol dvarav. It will say an akum, a non-Jew, has the rabbinic status of a zav. Because of that halacha l'maisa, if he touches trumas, ultimately he goes ahead and is mafsid them. He's metame them. See, here's what's interesting to note. What's fascinating over here is that halacha l'maisa, so an uncircumcised eved will essentially have the status of an akum. So the Gemara just says there's a problem with going ahead and maintaining an uncircumcised eved, and that is the concern that he is going to cause the loss of consecrated items. Good. Ubi'ira smucha, both say, so it's just another concern with maintaining an uncircumcised eved. The Gemara says, Ubi'ira smucha l'sapar. Now here's what's interesting. In a city that is close, a border city, this is fascinating. Ubi'ira smucha l'sapar, ein mashin oso kol ikar. And I will say, if the particular master lives in a border city, you can't maintain an uncircumcised eved at all. What's the concern? This is fascinating. Shema yishma davar v'yelech v'yomer lechavero ovei kochavim. And I will say, watch this. Border cities, all right, border cities are the first line of defense of Eretz Yisrael. So in general, by the way, I'll just illustrate this. There's an interesting halacha. The halacha generally is that when you go ahead and you sell property, there is a certain amount of time in Eretz Yisrael, a certain amount of time that you have to go ahead and buy back that which you sold. But even if you fail to buy back that which you sold, what happens? Yovel. And what occurs at Yovel? All property returns back to its original owner. There's a fascinating exception to this rule. What's the exception? If you sell property in a border city, you have 1 year to redeem it. If you don't redeem it in that year, what's the halacha? It goes ahead and yatsa lechalutin. It becomes the property of the new owner, and it does not revert back to you at Yovel. Doesn't revert back to you at Yovel. So we'll say, so what's the logic? This is incredible. And by the way, that's a profound idea. The Sefer HaChinuch explains, do you know why that is? He says, border cities are the first line of defense. In order for their defense to be solid, the residents of the city have to know the city and have to know each other. So because of that, we cannot have high turnover rates of property ownership in border cities. It's just fascinating, right? Eretz Yisrael has always faced an external threat. And again, the first line of defense is always the border cities. So the Gemara says something amazing. So let's say we could assume that Allah Chalamaysa will give you 12 months to negotiate with your Eved Kenani to go ahead and convince him to do circumcision. That's fine, except in a border city. In a border city, if you have an Eved who is unwilling to get on board, right? You have an Eved who is unwilling to go ahead and get a circumcision. The halacha is you have to sell him immediately. Why? Shema yishma davar. We're concerned that in the border city, he may hear something about the defenses of the city, the defenses of Eretz Yisrael. V'yelech v'yomer lechavero oved kochavim. And he may go out and what? He may go out and tell over these secrets, right? These defense secrets to another Gentile. So we'll say, just fascinating qualification. Good. Tanya, Rabbi Hananya Beno, Rabbi Gamliel, we'll say, listen to this Gemara. This is a profound Gemara. So Rabbi Hananya, son of Rabbi Gamliel, said as follows: Nitnei ma gerim bizman hazeh meunin v'yisurin ba'in aleim. They will say, why is it that gerim bizman hazeh? Now this is also interesting. Bizman hazeh meaning this time. What does it mean? Okay, the Gemara is so contemporarily for the Gemara. Why is it that gerim often seem to suffer adversity? Right? You would think that a person makes a choice to join the ranks of Klal Yisrael, and kind of life should be easy after that. After all, again, you make this decision which involves so much mesiras nefesh, so much self-sacrifice. One would think that after that, the path would be paved with incredible bracha, incredible ease. Yet, why is it that Gerim suffer so much? So the Gemara gives a couple of answers. Listen to this. Because they did not go ahead and uphold the 7 Noahide laws. They didn't. So what does that do with anything? Look at Rashi. Listen to this. So once they convert, they're held accountable that they did not go ahead and uphold the 7 Noahide laws when they were Gentiles. They were Gentiles. I will say this is incredibly amazing. See, one of the ways in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu exercises His compassion for us is that He punishes us for our sins in this world. This way, again, if we go ahead and we see punishment for our sins in this world, we are cleansed for the world to come. The Ovdei Kochavim, the Gentiles, the nations of the world, often again get their reward in this world and go ahead and are held accountable or face the accountability in the world to come. So listen to this. When this Gentile was a Gentile, so the fact that he didn't keep Shabbat Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, ultimately again, Okay, he'll get his punishment, he'll get the right accountability, will come in the world to come. Once he converts and he becomes a Jew, part of the Rahmanas of being a Jew is HaKadosh Baruch Hu holds us accountable in this world. In this world. So therefore, again, retribution for non-fulfillment of the 7 Noachide laws comes to this Akum now after he converts. Incredible. So the Gemara goes weiter. Another possibility. Here's the problem. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Gershin es Chag Kasher V'Sameach. Rabbi Yossi says, here's the problem with that. The problem is you're saying that there's accountability for his Gentile life once he becomes a Jew. What's the problem with that? Well, so we have a principle. And what's the principle? When a person converts, he's what? Like a reborn baby. So which means that the past is gone, right? That there is no accountability for what happened in his prior life. So what's the pshat? Rashi says, Kikatan shenolad ve'ino ne'enash al shaver. He shouldn't be held accountable for that which occurred in the past. Ela mipnei ma me'unen. So if that's the case, why is he? Silvie say, here's the part that you can't argue on. The Gemara is reflecting a mitzias. The mitzias is, Gerim have a difficult time. That's just the mitzias. Gerim have a difficult time. So how theologically do we explain the suffering of the ger? Which I will say is it's a theological minefield to try to explain suffering in general, unless you have a Navi who tells you why suffering is occurring. But Lamaisa, the Gemara is trying to somehow understand, at least on some level, to what do you attribute the difficulties of the convert? So again, possibility 1, non-fulfillment of Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach when he was a Gentile. Rejection of that Rabbi Yossi, Gershin is Gayer Kekatan Shenola Dami. Blank slate. Okay, so therefore Rabbi Yossi says, Rabbi Yossi says, there's a good reason. Sometimes Gerim are not careful with the details of mitzvos. Remember again, this goes back to the daf we had on Shabbos, right? Kashin Gerin Kisapachas. We saw that sugya there again. So sometimes the problem with a person when he converts or she converts is that perhaps they're not knowledgeable enough at the time of conversion, and halacha l'maisa therefore are not careful enough with the details of mitzvahs. So both say one of the reasons why we have such rigid conversion processes is by design, because once you become Jewish, the stakes are very high. The stakes are really very high. So when a person is not Jewish, right, you have 7 mitzvos, right, and most of them are things that most decent people would be doing anyway. But once you become Jewish, you suddenly have accountability for all of these details. And the problem is, let's be honest, most of us are not careful with all of the details. So therefore, again, a person who's coming into this willingly has now this new threshold of accountability. So Rabbi Yossi says, do you want to know why Gerim often have a difficult time in life? It's because they're not careful and vigilant with all the details. Sometimes because of a lack of knowledge, and sometimes just because it's difficult. But because they willingly stepped into this, there's almost like a heightened threshold of responsibility. Wow. So others saying that the heightened accountability of a ger is because often the motivation of a ger is meira, out of fear, and not out of love. And we'll say this, if we had more time, what there is to talk about this, about serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu out of love versus serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu out of fear. I both say that to be clear, first of all, fear means many things, and love means many things. If you look at Rashi is over miyiras gehenom u'miparonos ha'amura aleim. So Rashi understands that yira over here means yiras ha'onesh. Yiras ha'onesh, fear of punishment. That more often than not, the ger's Yiddishkeit is really based on a fear of punishment as opposed to a love of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And I will say, serving out of fear of punishment is a lower level. It is just a lower level. So because it is a lower level, that is a bit more of a compromised Yiddishkeit. As opposed to perhaps someone who's a little bit more familiar with Yiddishkeit, been living it a little bit longer, hopefully has graduated to a level of Avas Hashem and not just Yeshem. I will say, but what a profound yesod. The truth is, so many of us get stuck in this as well. And all too often, a Yiddishkeit that we present to our children is a Yiddishkeit of Yira and not of Ava. How careful we have to be to ultimately have... Now, again, I want to be clear. You have to have Yira. You have to have Yira. Right? Yiras Hashem, Yiras Shamayim, fear of punishment, awe and reverence is an absolute, indispensable part of our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If there is no yira, then ultimately, again, the relationship will disintegrate. But lamaisa, yira can't be the only motivator. There has to be a strong love. There has to be a strong ava. There has to be a strong sense of excitement. And you are saying that sometimes the ger, maybe it's because of his education that he got for his Yiddishkeit or a variety of other reasons. Apparently they're saying that more often than not they saw that it was yira that was guiding the gerim and not ava. Incredible. I will say last opinion. Achirim omrim mitnei sheshahu atzmon melehikanes tachas kanfei hashchina. I will say this is wild. Do you want to know why the gerim often have a difficult time, why they suffer? Because they waited too long to become Jewish. Wow. I'll say, brother, only Jews can say stuff like this, right? You're right. Shkayach on your conversion. What took you so long, right? What took you so long to get here? They'll say, what does this mean? They're held accountable because they delayed? Look at Rashi. And now, sorry. The Gemara said, where do we see this from before we get into this? Mikra, what's the pasuk that supports this? I will say, incredible. Megillas Rus. And what does the pasuk say by Rus? Yishalim Hashem Palek. So we'll say, this is Boaz talking to Rus. Hashem should pay you back for your actions. Utihi maskorteich shleiimah me'im Hashem Elokei Yisrael. And literally, again, your payment or your reward should be complete from Hashem, God of Israel. Asher bas lachasos tachas knafav. Because you have come literally to seek shelter under his wings. So we'll say, the lashon of Asher bas, Rashi says, shemiharta v'lo icharta. So Rashi understands lashon of Asher bas, that you came, is a lashon ultimately again of hurrying. That was what Boaz was complimenting Roosevelt was not simply that she converted, but that she converted expeditiously. I don't mean about the process of conversion, which was a quick process for Rus as well, but Lamaisa, the decision. Once the decision was made, the execution was immediate. There was no delay between the decision and the execution. So that's what Paul says, on the fact that you converted, but the fact that you did it expeditiously. You made a decision, you executed immediately. That's what Paul says, so Paul say, so this is incredible. So you have over here, the Gemara says, you have over the Achirim say, that halacha l'maisa, do you know why Gerim are sometimes held accountable? They're held accountable because halacha l'maisa, they delay in making the decision. In other words, or I should say, they delay in the execution. And I will say, what a profound yesod, not just for Gerim, but for life. Once you decide that something is right, once you decide that something needs to be done, failure to execute immediately, in and of itself, creates a level of liability and culpability. See, all too often in life, I know what I need to do. It's not a shayla. See, people say, sometimes I'm a supuk. What should I do? What should I not do? I'm not sure. It's not clear to me. I don't know what my derech is. Sometimes I know exactly what it is that I need to do. So there's not a lack of clarity to the mission. Where's the lack of clarity? Or where's the breakdown? The breakdown is in the execution. Why am I not getting the job done? Why am I not carrying through? Why am I not executing? And the Gemara says, failure to execute in a timely fashion creates liability in and of itself. Not just for Gerim, but for Gans Klal Yisrael, for everyone. So I will say, so again, 3 different ways in which the Gemara tries to understand why it is that Gerim seem to suffer. A fascinating discussion, because trying to go ahead and figure out why difficulties happen in this world, which is always fascinating. But I will say one possibility, again, didn't fulfill Shah Mitzvahs B'nai Noach. Second possibility is ultimately, again, they're not careful with Tiktukei Mitzvahs. And I will say there's another profound yesod, which is what? What do you mean they're not careful with mitzvahs? So we'll say if they're not careful, maybe they don't know. What do you see from here? You're held responsible for what you don't know. Do you know why? You should have learned it. Right? You should have learned it. Let's say ignorance is a good excuse for a little while. But after a certain amount of time, you can't plead ignorance anymore. Because the simple retort is, so why didn't you learn? So why didn't you become well-versed? You complete ignorance for a day, for 2 days, maybe even for a decade. But Lamais at a certain point in time, like the Gemara says, you should have learned. You should have been careful. You should have investigated. So we'll say, what an incredible yesod. You can't plead ignorance for your entire life. And lesson number 2, failure to execute in and of itself creates life liability. Incredible. I will say, let's go. Mem Testament Aleph Mishnah. Ezu Mamzer. Who's a Mamzer? Now don't look around, right? Don't start looking around, right? That's right. Who's a Mamzer? Who's a Mamzer? So let's listen to this. Kol she'er basar shu b'lo yavo. Now both say, the truth is, we've actually mentioned this machlokes already. So watch this. So who is a halachic mamzer? Kol she'er basar shehu b'lo yavo. Dear Rabbi Kiva. So we'll say, the way this actually translates is like this. Kol she'er basar means whoever is related to you in some way, even if the relationship is only punishable by a lav. By a lav. We'll say, these are the words of Rabbi Akiva. So look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi says, Kol she'er basar shehu b'lo yavo, kol kurva shehu b'lav, v'afilu im b'kares. So we'll say, any person who's quote-unquote related to you, even if the relationship is only punishable by a lav and not by kares. Kigon, anusas aviv krab Yehuda dahavi b'lav, deligan klaf aviv, umachmas krab kigon nosei chalutzaso dahavi b'lav. So Rashi gives examples over here. So let's say let's say one's father violates a woman, and then a son has relations with that woman. Product of that union will be a mamzer, because that's punishable by a lav. Or a man does chalitza, and then goes ahead and after he does chalitza, marries that woman. These are examples of women with whom you have we'll call a relationship with. There's a relationship there, but the relationship is quote unquote only punishable by a lav. Only punishable by a lav. So halacha l'maisa, again, Rabbi Akiva's position is this will create liability. This will create mamzerus. Shavuot said these words. So said this is the famous sheet of Rabbi Akiva, that even a lav creates a mamzer situation. Shimon HaTimni says, Kol shechayaven alav kares bidei shamayim. Shimon HaTimni says, no. Only time that mamzerus is created is when you have a situation of kares. Rashi says, Kol shechayaven alav kares, aval nosei chalutzas lo havi mamzer. So I'll say, Shimon HaTimni, only a relationship punishable by kares will create mamzerus. V'halacha kidvarov. And the Mishnah says that the halacha follows the words of Shimon HaTimni. That it is only mamzerus, it is only Isser Kares which creates mamzerus. Okay, but we'll say a third position. Rabbi Yehoshua Omer, Kol shechayaven alav misas bezdin. So we'll say this is very interesting. Rabbi Yehoshua says, any relationship punishable by a misas bezdin, by death, by capital punishment, creates mamzerus. So we'll say 3 positions. Rabbi Akiva, lav creates mamzerus. Shimon HaTimni, kares creates mamzerus. And now Rabbi Yehoshua, misas bezdin, capital punishment, creates mamzerus. Amr Rabbi Shimon ben Azai, matzas Megillas Yochsin b'Yerushalayim. So Rabbi Shimon ben Azai says, I found the Megillas Yochsin. And Megillas Yochsin refers to a genealogy scroll, which is literally, again, a scroll that a person had attesting to genealogy. Listen to this. The Kasuv Ba, and it said in this genealogy, it's just fascinating. What did it say in the scroll of genealogy? Ish Ploni Mamzer Me'eshes Ish. All right, that's an interesting family archive, right? So again, what did it say in it? It said, Ish Ploni, this guy is a mamzer. Now, why is he a mamzer? Me'eshes Ish. Because he is the product of an adulterous union. Now, I'm both saying, adultery is punishable by what? By what? Misas bezdin. Right? Misas bezdin. You're executed for adultery. So what do you see? In this genealogical scroll, it's saying that a guy is a mamzer based on misas bezdin. L'kayim divrei Rabbi Yehoshua. And I will say, what does this do? This genealogical scroll was a support for the position of Rabbi Yehoshua, who holds that halacha l'maisa mamzerus comes from misas bezdin. Okay, so we'll say, 3-way machlokes, how do you make a mamzer? Good. Next, Isha Shemesa Mutar Ba'achosa. So we'll say now, seemingly an unrelated topic, which is quite interesting. So we'll say, remember again, there's a prohibition. If a man is married to a woman, you cannot marry her sister. Now, I will say not only that, but halacha l'maaseh, even if you divorce your wife, you still can't marry her sister. The only time that prohibition goes away is when wife dies. Isha shemesa, if a woman goes ahead and dies, mutter ba'achosa. Ultimately, again, then a man is permitted to marry his sister. Both say, we spoke about this, we spoke this out. This must have been over Chalamayid, we spoke this out. That the interesting part about the prohibition of wife's sister is, you see over here that even after divorce, there's a relationship between a man and his ex-wife that remains, right? Which is really quite fascinating. There's some level of relationship that exists. V'haraya, her sister is still prohibited to him as long as ex-wife is still alive. However, again, once a man's wife passes away, then halacha l'maaseh, her sister becomes permitted. So ishto shemesa muter ba'achosa. Now listen to this. Gersha, if a man divorced his wife, umeisa, and then she dies, muter ba'achosa. He's permitted to go ahead and marry her sister. Now we'll say, what is Mishnah coming to teach me? What is it teaching me? That divorce by itself is not enough. Right? If a man divorced his wife, her sister still remains prohibited to the man. If he divorces her, and then ex-wife dies, then sister becomes permitted. Similarly, nisis la'acher umeisa muter ba'achosa. This is incredible. Let's say again, Reuven divorces his wife Rachel, and then Rachel marries another man. Right? And then Rachel dies. Then Reuven is permitted to marry Rachel's sister, Leah. What is Mishnah teaching me? What is Mishnah teaching me? That even if Reuven's ex-wife marries another man, her sister is still prohibited. Right? To Reuven, the only time the sister prohibition goes away is when ex-wife dies. Last case, the Gemara says, Chalatzla umeisa muter ba'achosa. If a man does chalitza, right, so he's prohibited to the chalutza's sister. Only after the chalutza passes away is he permitted to the sister. Nises la'acher umeisa. Similarly, again, if a man does chalitza with a woman, and then the woman goes and marries someone else, and then she dies, then the man is permitted to her sister. I will say, the common theme is the prohibition of achos isha, right, the prohibition of marrying one's wife's sister applies as long as one's wife is still alive, even if she's the ex-wife. Right? As long as she's alive, the prohibition remains. Only once she dies does the prohibition go away, and does the sister become permitted. Quite fascinating. Again, we'll discuss that sugya in depth. So says the Gemara, my time with Rabbi Akiva. So we'll say, now let's go back and analyze our three shitas. So we'll say, remember again, we have three different opinions as to how, or I should say, what type of scenario creates a mamzer. We've got Rabbi Akiva saying that any time that there's a relationship that's functional by a lav, mamzeros. So where does Rabbi Akiva get this? Right time to Rabbi Akiva. Here we go. The chsev lo yikach ish es eshes aviv. Shabbosai pasuk says, a man shall not take his father's wife. V'lo yigale knaf aviv. Nor should he go ahead and literally again uncover the corner of his father's garment. So we've seen this already before. So fine, we've seen this already before. And what happens? So knaf shera aviv lo yigale. So what that means is, where Rabbi Akiva darshans it is like Rabbi Yehuda, namely the corner of his garment, or the corner that has seen his father, should not be revealed. Which means any woman with whom a father has had relations, a son should not have relations with this woman. And Rabbi Akiva holds, like Rabbi Yehuda, that Rabbi Yehuda's interpretation, that this pasuk is referring to a woman who was violated by the father. Dahavile chayve lavin. That I both say, this is a lav. V'samech lo yavo mamzer b'kal Hashem. And I both say, so right after the pasuk that says that if the father violated a woman, the son is not permitted to have relations with her. Now that prohibition is a lav, and juxtaposed to that pasuk is lo yavo mamzer b'kal Hashem. What does that teach you? The juxtaposition teaches you that any relationship punishable by a lav ultimately will create mamzeros. Alma mehani havi mamzer. From a relationship like this. I will say, what's like this? There's really two criteria. Criteria number one is that there's some element of relationship, what we call a she'er or kurva. And number two, punishable by a lav. If you meet those two criteria, ultimately create mamzeros. I will Rabbi Simoi, the mar b'shar chayve lavin, the lav the she'er, ul Rabbi Yishaviv demar ba'afilu chai ve'aseh. So we'll say, now listen to this. In Shitas Rabbi Akiva, there's a bit of a machlokes. Listen to how fascinating this is. See, when the Mishnah sets down the position of Rabbi Akiva, the Mishnah is according to Rabbi Akiva, in order to create a mamzer, you have to have two criteria. Number one, she'er, which means what? Or kurva, some level of relationship. And number two, punishable by a lav. There are two other versions of Rabbi Akiva. According to Rabbi Simai says any relationship prohibited by a lav, even if there's no she'er or kurva, even if there's no relationship, right? Even if there's no relation, will still create mamzerus. And I both say Rabbi Simai, that was Rabbi Simai, and Rabbi Yishavev holds. Listen to this. According to Rabbi Akiva, even chayve aseh, even a relationship only punishable by what? By a positive commandment, will also create mamzerus. That's pretty wild. Now, take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Rabbi Simai, Rashi says, "B'ksuvas ukidushin min hakol hayos Rabbi Akiva mamzerim chutz mi'amana lekohen gadol shosach halalin v'lo mamzerim." K'tamar chutz mi'amana. So says, listen to this. So, for example, according to Rabbi Simai, if a man were to divorce his wife and then remarry her, so Rabbi say that is a lav that doesn't really have a share, that doesn't have a korva, there's no relationship there. So according to Rabbi Simai's version of Rabbi Akiva, that would create mamzerus. According to Rabbi Yishavev, even chayve aseh. Well, so what's the example of chayve aseh? This is pretty amazing. Rashi says over here, let's say you have an Egyptian or Edomite convert. So the halacha is you're not supposed to marry into the general pool until after 3 generations. Let's say you marry them 2nd generation. That's the violation of a positive commandment. According to Rabbi Yishavev's version of Rabbi Akiva, that would create mamzerus. So where do they glean their respective interpretations from? So the Gemara says, nafkaluhu me velo. So we'll say they learn it out from the extra word in the pasuk of velo. Pasuk didn't need to say velo, but it says velo, and therefore we learn it out from there. Okay, so the Gemara says v'shivana timni. So we'll say, so this is all the position. This because it could have just said lo yikach ish es eshes aviv, right? Yigal knaf aviv. So why does it say velo? The velo ultimately again is extra. Fine. So we'll say so that closes out Rabbi Akiva. Right, so now everyone in Rabbi Akiva's position is learning out from this pasuk. What about Shimon HaTimni? Shimon HaTimni, Savalei Kiraban, and then Mishra Shalva Chasam Daber. Let's listen to this. Shimon HaTimni, on the other hand, holds that on the pasuk of Lo Yikach Ish Es Eshes Aviv Lo Yigal Knaf Aviv, he holds that is referring to the Shomeres Yavam of one's father. So we'll say what that means essentially is it's referring to one's father's brother's wife. Okay, the Rabbi say one's father's brother's wife is a prohibited relationship punishable by kares. Lo yavam mamzer. And Rabbi say, so here's what's fascinating. Everyone's darshaning the same pasuk, they're just darshaning it different ways. According to Rabbi Akiva, the pasuk that says Lo yikach ish es eshes av lo yigala knaf aviv is referring to a woman who was violated by one's father. And the Torah is telling you, you can't have relations with that woman. Now that is an Isser Lav. That is an Isser Lav. And juxtaposed to that pasuk is, Lo Yavo Mamzer B'Kal Hashem. So Rabbi Akiva will say, what do you see from here? That any relationship punishable by a Lav that has an element of relation, ultimately again, creates Mamzerus. Rabbi Shimon HaTimni will say, no. The pasuk, same pasuk, is referring to Shomeres Yavam. That's referring to a woman who is waiting for Yibam from my father. Whose woman is waiting for Yibam from my father? It's my father's brother's wife. That is a woman who is asura to me, my aunt, my father's brother's wife, as an Isser Kares. And what does it say right afterwards? Lo Yava Mamzer B'Kal Hashem. What do you see from the juxtaposition? That it's an Isser Kares, which creates Mamzerus. Incredible. But Rabbi Yehoshua, what does Rabbi Yehoshua do? So remember again, Rabbi Yehoshua is of the opinion that halacha l'maisa, any misas bezdin, any relationship punishable by capital punishment is chayiv, creates mamzer. Rabbi Yehoshua, lichtov rachmana lo yigala. Torah could just say lo yigala. Don't uncover lo yikach lamali. Why do you need lo yikach? Ela lav hakikar. That's what it means to say. Lo yikach Ad lo yigala havi mamzer, tfei lo havi mamzer. That it is only the type of relationship that is described from lo yikach until lo yigala, which means what Rabbi say, Eshes Aviv, father's wife. Father's wife. It's only that type of relationship which creates mamzerus. So what's that type of relationship? Type of relationship punishable by death penalty that creates mamzerus. But anything less than that or different than that does not create mamzerus. Amar Abaye. So we'll say, so again, this is the three-way machlokas. Now the truth is, we'll see. We already know because we've spoken about it that we pass like Shimon HaTimni, that it is only a relationship punishable by kares that ultimately creates mamzerus, but we'll see it more inside. I'll say, but again, the point to remember over here is fundamental three-way machlokas. What type of relationship creates mamzerus? Let's go back. Amar Abaye says, everyone agrees that halacha l'maisa, if a man has relations with a nida, and remember again, having relations with a woman who is in nida is an isser kares. It's an isser kares. But yet, despite that, everyone agrees that if a man has a child with a nida, bi'al hasota, or with a sota, she'ein havlad mamzer, that the offspring is not a mamzer. Now take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Haba ala sota. So Rashi says, Eishes isha zinsa. So let's remember again, who's the sota in question? Remember again, sota is a very specific process of a man warned his wife in front of witnesses not to be alone with a particular man. She violated the warning. She was alone with this man, ultimately again for enough time for some illicit act to have occurred. And halacha l'maisa, again, remember, there's a whole process now that has to happen. She's taken to the Beis HaMikdash, has to drink from the Mesota, from the waters of the Sota, right? And halacha l'maisa essentially is treated as she's asura to her husband up until the point that the waters clarify her status. What the Gemara is saying is like this: if a man has relations with an Nida and has a child with a woman who's an Nida, or ultimately again a man has a child with his wife who's a Sota, even though again these are prohibitions, halacha l'maisa, everyone agrees they do not create mamzerus. Now why not? I will say this is, by the way, this is one of the most incredible ideas. I will say because Anida is an Isser Kares, yet again, Sota a little less, but Lamaisa, so why not? So here we go. Nida the Hatafsi Bakidushin. I will say, I'll tell you why. Because a woman who's a Nida, despite the fact that she is a Chi of Kares, or there is a Chi of Kares, having relations with her, Kiddushin is Tovsin with a woman who is a Nida. You could affect Kiddushin. Nabal says, Shneemar, Vatehi Nidasa Alov. Nabal says, it's actually fascinating. The pasuk talks about the idea that if a man has relations with a woman who is in nida, the pasuk says "Vatihi utihi nida salav," which literally means her nidos is upon him, which means actually her level of ritual impurity is conveyed to him. The way the Gemara darshans this is afilu b'shas nidasa, even when a woman is a nida, tafsi ba kiddushin. So ultimately, Kiddushin will take effect. So the way the Gemara's darshaning is Utihi Nida Salav. Even when she's a Nida, she can be Alav. Ultimately, she can be taken by him in Kiddushin, which is fascinating. Take a look at Rashi. Rashi says, Leisha de'afla acher shezinsa lo paku mina Kiddushin harishonim. Sorry, wrong Rashi. You're getting ahead. So we'll say, so that's Nida. So therefore, we'll say, what the Gemara is saying is something really fascinating. So why is it that relations with a Nida doesn't create Mamzerus? Because even when she's in the state of a Nida, you could affect Kiddushin. And since Kiddushin can be affected even in the midst of Nidos, it can't be that such a union then creates Mamzerus. Sota, what about Sota? Nehi nami detavsi ba Kiddushin. So we'll say, listen to this, Sota is the same idea, because ultimately, again, when a woman is a Sota, ultimately, again, Kiddushin takes effect. You could affect Kiddushin. I will say, now what does that mean? Who is a Sota affecting Kiddushin with? Rashi says, no, here's what, look at Rashi. Right across. Da tafsi ba Kiddushin, li'isha, da'af la'achar shezinsa, lo paka mina Kiddushin harishonim. I will say, listen to this. Even once a woman becomes a Sota, her initial Kiddushin still remains in effect. Right? There was it's not the pshat that a woman commits adultery or a woman commits an act of znus and suddenly again the Kiddushin evaporates. Her Kiddushin is still in effect. So what the Gemara is saying is essentially fascinating. any situation where you have kiddushin or where kiddushin could take effect cannot create mamzerus. You see, part of the function of mamzerus is that mamzerus is the result of a union which could never actualize in halacha. But a relationship which could actualize in halacha, even if it is fundamentally prohibited, cannot create mamzerus. It's fascinating. I will say, because essentially what the Gemara is going to be is a definition. What is a mamzer? A mamzer is the product of a union which can never halachically actualize. So a man has relations with his sister, right? An act of incest, right? An act of incest. Or I guess, it'll depend who you go according to. Or according to Rabbi Yehoshua, an act of adultery, right? These are unions which cannot occur in halacha. So because they cannot occur, a mamzer is the product of a union which cannot actualize in halacha. What the Gemara is saying is, however, if you have a union which can absolutely actualize, albeit what? It's asr, right? Or relations are asr, that can't create a mamzer. So a man has relations with a nida. Ultimately, again, can that relationship actualize in halacha? Actualize in halacha? Yeah, we just saw. You could do kiddushin with Rosa. Today, right, I will say, could a couple get married if a woman is a nida? Of course. It happens all the time. Again, we try not, because a chupas nida is a little bit more complicated. But l'maisa, again, of course, you could affect marriage. Right? Kiddushin and nisuin. Ultimately, again, when a woman's a nida. Sota. I will say, so a woman becomes a sota. Is the couple still married even after a woman becomes a sota? Are they married? Absolutely. See, you see, these are unions. But yet relations with a nida is an isser kares. Relations with a sota is asr. But l'maisa, halacha, again, it doesn't produce mamzer. Really a fascinating definition. Taina, that supports this. Everyone agrees that if a man has relations with a nida, or with a sota, or with a shomeres yavam, this is interesting. Let's say I will say someone from the outside has relations with Rachel, who's waiting for yibum, and she becomes pregnant from that. All agree that Allah Lamaisa, the offspring is not a mamzer. Look at Rashi, Shomeres Yavam, Li'echa min hashuk b'lo chalitza, shina vlad mamzer. Now we're going to discuss this case in a little bit greater. Va'abaye, Shomeres Yavam, Mesapkele, Ikirav, Ikishmuel. Now we'll say that last case, the Gemara kind of just slid in Shomeres Yavam. We're going to see Shomeres Yavam is actually going to be the subject of a fierce machlokes, Rav and Shmuel. If you take a look at Rashi says over Ikirav Damar Perak Isharaba Minayin Shei Kiddushin Tovsim B'Yevamo Devsiv Lo Siyesha. Both say we are going to see that halacha l'maisa. An interesting case. Reuven dies, leaves behind the widow Rachel. Right. So now there's Shimon. Right. Shimon is going to go out and do Yibum. Both say so now. Let's say against someone from the outside. Let's say then Rachel accepts Kiddushin from Levi, unrelated guy. Does that Kiddushin work or not? Fierce machlokes, Rav and Shmuel. We'll get to it again. Rashi quotes, where is it? Tzadik Beis. Let's do a little while. We'll get to it. 92b. We'll see this machlokes. So the point also over here is that the Gemara kind of slid in there Shomeres Yavam, but Shomeres Yavam is going to be a machlokes. We'll also say, but here's what we do know. What we do know is that halacha l'maisa, a child that's a result of relations with a nida is not a mamzer. And we'll say that is halacha l'maisa. I'll tell you something. The Aruch HaShulchan. Before we get to that, relations with a sota, aser. But ultimately, again, does not create mamzera. So I will say, so just pointing out over here that even according to Shimon HaTimni, there are situations where you could have relations that is an Isser Kares, but doesn't create mamzerus, right? The only exceptions really will be nida, right? Nida. Good. We'll say, I will tell you something amazing. The Aruch HaShulchan brings down, he talks about this concept that relations with a nida, right, don't create mamzerus. So the Aruch HaShulchan says something amazing. He says, what do you see from here? The ways of the Torah are pleasant. Because I will say, can you imagine what Klal Yisrael would look like if relations with a nida created mamzerus? Right? I was like, can you imagine what the demographics of Klal Yisrael would be? Right? There are many people who unfortunately are not careful with Taras HaMishpacha. By the way, even sometimes people who are careful unknowingly, right? There's so many halachas concerning it. Right? So if mamzerim were created from relations with a nida, there would be a proliferation of mamzerus in Klal Yisrael. So the Aruch HaShulchan says, again, I will say, that's not the motivation. The reason is the Gemara is a svara. But you see the Aruch HaShulchan says that built into halachas, the ways of the Torah are pleasant. Chash Baruch Hu doesn't want it to be. You could have someone who's not knowledgeable about the halachas, or someone who is knowledgeable, but just maybe not knowledgeable enough, or someone who is knowledgeable, but it's a difficult area in halacha to adhere to. So in order to ensure that there's not a proliferation of mamzerus, ultimately, again, Chazal give us this beautiful drasha. That's not the motivation. I will say again, the drasha is the drasha. The Aruch HaShulchan just notes a fascinating byproduct of this drasha. Incredible. We'll say now we come to a fascinating sugya. Here we go. Arub Shimon Azai. Tani Shimon Azai Omer. Matzasi Megillas Yuchsam Yerushalayim. So let's remember again, quoting the Mishnah, I found this Megillas Yuchsin, right? This genealogical scroll in Yerushalayim. The Kasuv Ba, and it says in it, Ish Ploni Mamzer Me'eshes Ish. Right? It also, right, it says in that genealogical scroll, so and so is a Mamzer as a product, because he's the product of an adulterous union. Okay? And I will say, we're going to skip that part for just a moment, because look what else it said in that Megillas Yuchsin. The Kasuv Ba, Mishnas Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, Kav V'Noki. I will say the teachings of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov are Kav. Kav means they are few. V'Noki, but they are pure. But say, take a look at Rashi. Mishnas Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Kav V'Noki. Rashi's Kav Mida Kitane Klor Mkomos Muatim Who Niskar b'Mishnah b'Braisa. But say Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is quoted very few times throughout Shas. Right? That's Kav. But whenever he's quoted Naki, B'chol Makom Sheniska Halacha Kimoso. He's quoted very few times, I would say, but whenever he is quoted, the halacha always follows him. I would say, by the way, what a musar. What a musar. Sometimes it's the people who speak less that have truly something profound to say. Right? People who comment on everything generally have very little to contribute. But the people who are measured in their words, speak episodically, weigh those words carefully, usually it's always profound. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is quoted very few times, but whenever he is quoted, the halacha always follows him. Incredible. The Kasaba, the Vosai, get ready for this. Get ready for this. Get ready for this. What else does it say in the Megillas Yuchsin? Listen to this. Kasaba, Menashe Harag es Yeshaya. I will say, what else did it include in this Megillas Yuchsin? A riveting piece of historical information. That King Menashe killed the prophet Yeshaya. King Menashe killed the prophet Yeshaya. And I will say, now, what happened there? Amarava, Meidon Daine Vekatle. There was a process. Menashe judged the prophet Yeshaya. Menashe judged the prophet Yeshaya, and he decided to kill him. Why? I will say, why did Menashe decide to kill Yeshaya? Listen to this. Amarle, Moshe Rabcha Amar, Menashe said to Yeshaya like this. Yeshaya, Moshe Rabbeinu said, Kilo Yirani Ha'adam V'chai. Moshe Rabbeinu said that a person cannot see Hashem and live. V'at Amrit, yet you Yeshaya, you said, V'era es Hashem Yoshev al Kisei Ram V'nisa. Yet you Yeshaya said that what? That you could see Hashem. That you could see Hashem sitting on his throne. So again, Menashe was accusing Yeshaya of lying. Moshe said, you cannot see HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and now again, you Yeshaya are saying that Allah L'maisa, you could see Hashem. Moshe Rab Chomer, Mikashon Kim B'chol Karinu Alav. Listen to this. Moshe Rabbeinu said, who is like Hashem our God, who is there whenever we call out to him? Which I will say makes it sound like what? You could call out to HaKadosh Baruch Hu whenever you want. And what? And Moshe, and V'at Amrit, and you said, Yehoshua Hashem Behimatzo. Seek out Hashem when he makes himself available. Which sounds like what? Hashem is only available when? At certain times. At certain times. Moshe Rabcha Amar, Es Mispar Yamecha Amale. Moshe Rabbeinu said, I will fill. Right? I will fill the number of years, your years, which Rashi points out over here means Lav Lashon Tosefes Alamasho Lo Yoser. Hashem gives you the exact number of years that you're destined to have. V'at Amrit V'alsafti Al Yamecha Chamesh Esrei Shana. And you, Yeshaya, said, I'll add on to your years 15. I'll add on to your days, 15 years, which makes it sound like that sometimes Hashem adds on or subtracts from lifespans. So Menashe accused Yeshaya ultimately again of going ahead and fabricating halachas, contradicting Moshe. So I will say, so let's finish this right and I'll tell you the correct. So Amar Yeshaya. So now Menashe levels these charges at Menashe. Menashe leveled these charges at Yeshaya. Amar Yeshaya, Yedanabe, de lo mekabel ma de imale. So Yeshaya says, I know that Menashe, we're going to see, there's an answer, an explanation for all these things. Yeshaya said, I know that Menashe is not going to listen to me. I know it already. So therefore again, V'i emale, and if I explain this to him, I explain to him my psukim, my statements, then what's going to happen? He's still going to reject it. He's still going to kill me. Ishvi mezid. See, Rabbi say right now, if Yeshaya kills me, if Menashe kills me, then ultimately again he'll be a shogeg. What does it mean he'll be a shogeg? That we can blame it on the fact that halacha lamaisa, he thinks he's right. If I explain to him my positions and he sees that he's really wrong, he's going to become amazed. So what did Yeshaya do? Says wild. Amar, shame. He said the name of Hashem with incredible concentration. Ivla ba'arza. And somehow he became absorbed into a cedar tree. Miracle happened. Asyua la'arza v'nasrua. So they discovered the cedar tree that Yeshaya was absorbed in. And they began to cut it apart. They took an axe and they began to cut it apart. Kimata lahade puma, when the axe got to Yeshaya's mouth, nach nafshe, he died. Mishum da'amar ubesoch am tamis v'asayim anochi yoshev. Ultimately, it was because Yeshaya himself was held accountable for speaking ill of Klal Yisrael. Because Yeshaya himself said, within a nation of impure lips, do I reside. So I say, there's so much happening in this story. So let's take a step back for just a moment. So do you understand the true profundity of the story? Understand, Menashe was Yeshaya's grandson. Was his grandson. Remember again, you remember the story in Maseches Brachos. Remember the story. Right? Good. Remember the story, right? Chizkiyahu Melech Yehuda is on his deathbed. Famous Naisa. Chizkiyahu Melech Yehuda is on his deathbed. Right? And the Navi Yeshaya comes to do Bikur Cholim. It wasn't quite Bikur Cholim because he came to tell him, you're going to die. You're going to die, right? And ultimately Chizkiyahu says, why am I going to die? Yeshaya says, because you refused to marry. Chizkiyahu said, you know why I refused to marry? Because I saw prophetically that if I have a son, my son is going to be an incredible Russian Avodah Zarah. And remember again, Yeshayahu says to Chizkiyahu, B'hadei kav she'dirachmana lamalach. Why are you getting involved in God's calculations? Don't try to run God's world for him. You do your thing. Get married, try to have a family. What'll be, will be. What does Chizkiyahu say to Yeshayahu? Fine, let me marry your daughter. Right? Yeshayahu had a daughter. At first, what does Yeshayahu say to Chizkiyahu? Sorry, too late, I already told you you're going to die. Right? Until ultimately, again, Chizkiyahu prevails. So indeed, Chizkiyahu marries Yeshayahu's daughter, and they have a son. That son was named Menashe. Menashe was the longest reigning monarch. He reigned for 55 years. He was a Rasha for 33 of those years, 22 of those years, about Tshuva for 33 of those years. Shabbosai, what's incredibly profound about this story is this is grandson judging grandfather. And I will say now also the response of Yeshaya makes sense. Right, Bossy, you say to yourself, Yeshaya doesn't want to defend himself. Why doesn't he want to defend himself? Because he knows that Menashe is not going to listen. Right? So who cares? So who cares? But try, save your life. I will say, it's his grandson. It's his grandson. So listen to this Mesiras Nefesh. Yeshayahu would rather give his life and die at the hands of his grandson, allowing his grandson to think he's doing the right thing, than to set the record straight, knowing that his grandson is still going to kill him, but then his grandson becomes amazed. His grandson becomes an intentional murderer. We'll say such an incredibly riveting story. So now what happens again? So let's finish this up. So now what happens? So then Yeshua says, Hashem absorbed into the cedar tree. Fantastic. Rabbi say, Yeshayahu is saved until the axe gets to his mouth. Apparently, the rest of his body was protected. Why wasn't his mouth protected? Because Yeshayahu had slandered Klal Yisrael. He said this phrase, "Ubesoch am tamei sfasayim anochi yoshev." I dwell within the midst of a nation of impure lips. I will say, just to understand over here the context, Yeshayahu was not maligning Klal Yisrael. He wasn't. He was actually belittling himself. He had received a dramatic prophetic vision, and he said essentially, I'm unworthy of this. I'm unworthy of this. But the way he described his unworthiness was not just a personalistic unworthiness, but a national unworthiness. So his entire body was protected, except his mouth. So when the axe got to his mouth, there was no longer any protection, and he died. So we'll stop over here for today. The story's not over. But what do you see? What do you see from here? First of all, how careful you have to be when you speak about Klal Yisrael. And how careful in general you have to be when you use your mouth. But Lamais, how careful you have to be when you speak about Jews, speak about Klal Yisrael. Because sometimes, even if you don't mean something negative, anytime negative words about Klal Yisrael pass through our lips, they put our mouth, and by extension our lives, in peril. Always have to speak good of the Jew, always have to speak positively of the Jew, always have to see ultimately the beauty in the Jew. We'll say, the mice is not over, and Mir Hashem to be continued tomorrow. Shkoyach.